In 1938, Arthur Small, a lighthouse keeper in Massachusetts, woke up in a hospital after being unconscious for 2 weeks. He was exhausted, confused, and in pain. When the doctors came to check up on him, he was given news that changed his life. This would be one of many tales highlighting the heroism, deception, and tragedy between the Small brothers. I'm Carolina, and welcome to the Lighthouse Narrative. Andrew Small and his wife had 3 sons together, Judson, Arthur, and Tom. While Arthur and Tom were born in Massachusetts, where the family lived, Judson was born in Canada. Of all the brothers, Arthur was the most well-known, a talented maritime artist who was loyal to the Lighthouse Service. But let's rewind to his earlier years. Arthur was 14 years old when he started his career as a seaman, sailing on a fishing schooner and then traveling the world with the Great White Fleet, a group of U.S. Navy battleships under the order of President Theodore Roosevelt. While traveling at sea, he developed an interest in art, painting on scraps of sail and later honing his skills in formal classes at the Swinefree School of Design. Painting became a passionate hobby, where he created canvases of detailed harbor scenes and ships. In the New England area of the United States, he was known as the artist lighthouse keeper. In 1916, Arthur was the first of the brothers to enter the Lighthouse Service, beginning as a second assistant keeper at Boston Light. He was such a diligent worker that he fast-tracked his way to principal keeper the next year, transferring to Narrows Light, just across the water from the Brewster Islands, where Boston Light was located. Narrows was known as the bug light of the harbor, a screw-pile lighthouse that looked like an insect from a distance, marking the entrance to the Narrows Channel, one of the major routes to Boston's port. The lighthouse was built in 1856 along a sandspit that could be walked along at low tide. During Arthur's time at Narrows, the youngest brother Tom joined the service in the same manner, as a second assistant keeper of Boston Light in 1920. Tom had years of experience as a marine observer for the Boston Chamber of Commerce, having intimate knowledge of the comings and goings of ships in the harbor. Not only that, he also served in the U.S. Navy and had been part of the National Guard in Texas. Tom was faring well as an assistant until 1921, when he almost lost his life. While sailing in the harbor, his boat unexpectedly capsized. A life-saving crew was dispatched when he was reported missing, but since fog in the harbor lowered visibility, their attempt failed. Upon hearing about his brother's disappearance, Arthur went out to search for him. He discovered Tom clinging to his overturned boat near Narrows Light. He was freezing and had lost hope that anyone would find him, but Arthur became his savior. Later that year in December, Arthur was involved in another rescue at the lighthouse. On one freezing cold night, he hurried outside barely dressed when he heard cries for help. Looking down from the deck, he discovered a half-frozen fisherman covered in ice, gripping the station's ladder. After hurriedly bringing the man inside, he rushed back out to search for anything amiss, spotting 2 more men clinging to a boat. He secured the boat with an anchor and rescued the men, all of them recovering in the warmth of the lighthouse. The 1920s played host to a series of changes. Tom was promoted and took over as principal keeper of Narrows Light, moving in with his wife Florence and their son Jimmy. Arthur transferred to Palmer Island Light in New Bedford, bringing his wife Mabel and their 2 sons along with them. Tom continued to follow Arthur's path with his own share of adventures at Narrows Light, like saving a man from a rowboat drifting to open sea, towing a disabled motorboat to safety, assisting a Navy hydroplane, and helping refloat a fishing vessel. In 1923, the oldest brother, Judson, entered the service as a first assistant keeper of Deer Island Light. It was established in 1890 in an isolated location, providing safe guidance through the Broad Sound channels in Boston Harbor. Before the service, Judson had been an engineman and carpenter on and off in his adult years. He'd some knowledge of sailing and even drew and painted with his oils in his spare time, but it wasn't a passionate hobby like Arthur treated it to be. He lived a bachelor's life, never having kids or getting married, but he did spend time with his brothers, chartering boats to head out on adventures together. Judson lived a fairly quiet life and kept mostly to himself, unlike Tom, who'd proved to have a habit of causing trouble. During the summer of 1929, Tom was removing paint from the lighthouse's wooden exterior with a blowtorch. A small spark from the toll ignited, causing the roof to catch on fire. Within 15 minutes, the lighthouse was engulfed in flames while Tom tried to save whatever possessions he could. In his rush, the structure crumbled, the fog bell crashing into the waters below, missing Tom by a mere few inches. As he escaped in his rowboat, the Coast Guard and the Boston Fireboat Service arrived to quell the flames, but it was too late to save the lighthouse. It had completely collapsed. The only thing left was its framework. It was never rebuilt and was instead replaced with a buoy, then later a skeletal tower. On the bright side, Florence and their son were visiting Boston when the incident occurred, so neither of them were injured. Tom was awarded $1,000 for the loss of his personal property. In light of the incident, he left the service for a brief period of time before returning to work as a temporary assistant at different lighthouses since an open position wasn't available. He eventually landed a permanent position as a first assistant keeper at Duxbury Pier Light, where he briefly stayed before transferring to Plymouth Light, where another stumbling block in his career appeared. Plymouth Light, also known as Gurnet Light, guided ships around shallow shoals into Plymouth Bay. The station was established in 1768 and was known to have the first set of twin lights in the United States. Frank A. Davis was the principal keeper when Tom arrived, and unfortunately, the two didn't get along, but that's putting it lightly. Hatred was brewing. Initial issues sprung up when they blamed each other for not properly managing the Fresnel lens. The oil in the reservoir went missing, the lantern room's windows weren't cleaned, and sometimes the light of the lens went out, a huge no-no in the Lighthouse Service. They even accused each other of taking leaves of absence for longer than what was allowed, and not properly recording their comings and goings from the lighthouse in the record book. It was a constant war between the keepers on who could get the other in trouble first, the list of official complaints submitted multiplying weeks at a time. Frank called Tom a liar, a foul man constantly threatening to beat him up and cursing him out. He also mentioned Tom had a habit of not picking up his son from school, leaving the task to his wife or himself. In turn, Tom accused Frank of holding the record book hostage in his room so he couldn't get to it. When the Lighthouse Board investigated, they leaned in Frank's favor, concluding that Tom had an issue with authority. Since he'd previously been a principal keeper, the board alleged Tom didn't feel the need to follow Frank's orders. He'd come and go as he pleased without consultation. As a solution, Tom was relocated to Middle's Ledge Light in 1930. He spent close to a year there before transferring to Duxbury Pier and then finally Deer Island, where he was promoted to principal keeper. A familiar face greeted him at the station, his oldest brother, Judson Small. Judson's path in the Lighthouse Service isn't as dense as Arthur and Tom, but there are some events recorded in his history. Last when we left off with him, he was a first assistant at Deer Island Light. He transferred to Butler Flats in 1924. He spent 2 years there before returning to Deer Island for a longer stint in 1927. Before Tom arrived at the lighthouse, he had his own misadventure in February of 1931. While Merle B. King, the principal keeper, went to shore to get a new set of provisions for the lighthouse, the seas grew so rough that he couldn't make the 2-mile trip back to the lighthouse for 3 days. In that time, Judson only slept for brief periods, managing the light and fog signal on his own around the clock. Since food supply was low, he relied on emergency rations to keep himself fed. On top of his current plight, he'd been stuck at the lighthouse for 6 weeks, when keepers were typically allowed shore leave once a month. This small drama was short-lived as Merle eventually made his way back to the station, but he'd be caught in his own scandalous situation. In May that same year, a superintendent stopped by the lighthouse for an inspection. He was appalled to find it in poor condition, the rooms unkept and the keepers appearing disheveled. As the superintendent inspected the basement, he heard a commotion upstairs. only to discover Merrill trying to secretly dispose of beer he'd been brewing. Alcohol at any lighthouse was not allowed. Merrill tried to downplay his actions, feeling he hadn't violated regulations, but the superintendent thought otherwise. He was forced to resign, allowing Tom to become Deer Island Light's new principal keeper. This was the first time any of the small brothers worked together. This would be a smooth transition, right? Let me tell you, things continued to get worse. The lighthouse remained in a state of disarray, trash everywhere. Following proper protocol was an issue once again, as Tom left and came to the lighthouse whenever he wanted, reportedly spending a lot of leisure time on the mainland. While he was out, his cat became a popular fixture of the lighthouse, as it was known for continuously climbing up and down the ladder and rungs of the station to catch fish. Unlike Tom's previous assignments, Deer Island had stricter regulations. Before, he was able to live with his family, but at Deer Island, he couldn't. There was a rule in place that no women or children were allowed because of its location, but Tom brought his wife to visit the light from time to time. An inspector even caught her there once and reprimanded Tom. Leaves of absence were also a hugely debated issue. The Lighthouse Board claimed Tom and Judson weren't recording their leave time accurately in the record book. It was required that records be written in ink, but both keepers were writing information in pencil, allowing them to allegedly change the records around to suit their needs. When they were both asked separately on the matter, neither of them called out the other and were unclear in their answers. Frankly, the board felt the brothers were abusing their privileges and covering for each other. In cases when something goes wrong at a lighthouse, the principal keeper takes the brunt of the responsibility. Tom was demoted back to first assistant and relocated to Hog Island Shoal Light in 1939. We last left Arthur as principal keeper of Palmer Island Light, far away from the shenanigans of his brothers. Palmer Island was a rubble stone lighthouse built in 1849 to mark the entrance to New Bedford Harbor, the whaling capital of the country in the mid-1800s. It originally had a birdcage lantern room, which was changed to a different style in 1863. When Arthur and Mabel arrived in 1922, a bell tower was built and attached to the lighthouse. They settled into the keeper's dwelling, which Arthur renovated on his own as it was in poor shape. He'd eventually joined the Mariners Club and began tutoring one of the members' relatives, Helen Sayre, when she showed great potential as an artist. As for Mabel, she joined a sewing circle in Fairhaven. Arthur was known as Captain Small in the area, giving interviews to local newspapers. During one of these interviews, the conversation centered around lighthouse keepers as heroes, of which Arthur had this to say, quote, "We're not heroes. Here I am on this island, perfectly safe, working and painting pictures, while you wander around New Bedford, crossing streets with automobiles and trolley cars whizzing by, just missing you by a few feet. Why, you probably take more chances in a week than I do in 10 years. End quote. These words would haunt him later. On September 21st, the Great Hurricane of 1938 struck New Bedford, one of the deadliest hurricanes in New England's history. It began developing on September 9th, made landfall in Long Island on September 21st, and moved rapidly. Residents were unprepared, as they didn't even know a hurricane was barreling towards them. Technology around weather reporting wasn't advanced enough to alert of the incoming danger. Some reports at the time had only noted fair weather with some mix of wind and rain, but not a hurricane. Hundreds of lives were lost, and thousands of homes and farmland were destroyed. Even some lighthouses were heavily damaged. In severe cases like these, it was procedural for keepers to keep vigil in their lighthouses, ensuring the lantern as well as the fog signal operated to guide mariners through harsh conditions to keep them safe. During the height of the chaos, Palmer Island was battered by harsh winds. Arthur directed Mabel to take shelter in the oil house, feeling it was the safest structure, as it was located on the island's highest point. As for him, he attempted to make his way to the lighthouse. Arthur's struggle was in vain, as a massive wave overtook him and swept him underwater. Injured but conscious, he fought his way to swim back to shore. As he made it to the island, he stumbled, looked up, and to his shock, saw his wife in the boathouse preparing the rowboat to rescue him. He screamed at her to stop to return to the safety of the lighthouse, but a giant wave swallowed Mabel in the boathouse. It was the last thing he saw before being knocked unconscious. Arthur awoke some hours later, lying on a broken window, and crawled his way to the lighthouse, his body working on autopilot. He made it inside and activated the light, watching it throughout the night, despite the ordeal he just went through. The next morning, 2 of his worried friends rowed to the island and discovered him in poor condition. Under police escort, they took him to the Chelsea Marine Hospital, where he lay unconscious for 2 weeks. When he woke up, he was given tragic news. A large chunk of his paintings from a collection spanning 30 years was lost, along with reference material in his precious library. The couple's savings, $7,500, was also gone. And most importantly, above everything else, his wife had died, her body having been discovered in Fairhaven, her birthday just a few days away. As for Palmer Island, the only structures to survive were the lighthouse and the oil house. Suffering from such heavy losses, and also in recognition of Arthur's bravery and loyalty to his duty, the Lighthouse Board granted him paid leave for an extended period of time, which he spent some of it in Panama with his son. By the summer of 1939, Arthur accepted a position at Hospital Point Front Range Light while also maintaining the lights at Derby Wharf and Fort Pickering. He'd ultimately joined the U.S. Coast Guard as they had taken control of lighthouses at this time. He worked at the lighthouse until 1947, when it was automated, and retired. There's one more mishap we'll rewind back to concerning Tom, as trouble seemed to follow him wherever he went. He relocated from Hog Island to Duxbury Pure Light, once again promoted to principal keeper in 1940. A year later, he left the Lighthouse Service to join the U.S. Coast Guard. Sometime around this transition, he was reacquainted with his longtime nemesis, Frank A. Davis. It's unclear how they met again. According to their retirement cards, both enlisted into the Coast Guard in May of 1941, but still worked at different light stations. In the summertime, they were working together again at Duxbury Station, although it's not clear if this station refers to a general area or a lighthouse. The incident may very well have taken place at Plymouth Light. Regardless of 10 years having passed, their hatred for one another was alive and thriving. They began to quarrel again, this time over curtains. Yes, curtains. Frank was displeased that Tom was folding curtains used to cover the Fresnel lens. Despite repeatedly telling him off, Tom continued to fold the offending piece of fabric. Frank notified the commanding officer, Theodore P. Sullivan, of the violation to his orders. As Frank was in charge, Theodore gave Tom an ultimatum: stop disobeying orders or be reported. This seemed to have worked, as Tom continued on with his duties, but Theodore noticed the growing animosity of the keepers towards each other. He became so concerned that he sent a letter to the commander of the Boston district. Quote, "While no act has as yet been committed by one against the other which would merit reprimand, there is every indication that an ultimate showdown is forthcoming unless these men are separated. It is each man's avowed intention to get the other despite frequent warnings of the consequences." End quote. The letter was taken seriously. To resolve the matter, Tom was transferred to Brant Rock Lifeboat Station later that year. Judson remained at Deer Island Light until 1941, when he was transferred to his last assignment at Race Point Light. After a year, he started to experience medical issues. According to his records, he developed arthritis, a limp in his left leg, and a hernia. On examination, the doctors reported he displayed a form of mental degeneration, and his physical ailments made it difficult for him to perform his duties. He retired due to disability in 1943. He died in 1951, the first of the brothers to be put to rest. As for Arthur, he passed away in 1958, being buried at the Arlington National Cemetery, honored by the U.S. Coast Guard. A plaque was fabricated for him and his wife at Fort Phoenix. And finally, Tom passed away in 1959, ending the prolific tales of the Small brothers in the Lighthouse Service and the U.S. Coast Guard. Thank you for listening to the fascinating history of the Small family. Join me next time as we continue to explore lighthouses and the story of its keepers. Until then, happy lighthouse hunting.